Welcome back to the IEA podcast Everything Energy. I'm Dan Hewitt. Some of the energy solutions we cover in this podcast are highly technical, require large upfront sums, and can take years to deliver results. This isn't the case when it comes to expanding clean cooking in Africa, but the problem is urgent. More than 1 billion people still cook over open fires across the continent, causing respiratory illnesses that lead to over 800,000 premature deaths every year. New IEA analysis shows there is a pathway to full access by 2040. So what needs to be done now to tackle this deep-seated energy inequality and move closer to this crucial milestone? We're going to discuss this in two parts. We'll start by talking to Syrine El Abed, the IEA's Africa Transitions Officer, and then Dan Wetzel, Head of the Tracking Sustainable Transitions Unit. Syrine, thanks for joining us today. So to start with, could you give us an overview of what the situation is like in Africa today? So when we talk about the lack of clean cooking access, what does that look like? What does that feel like on a day-to-day basis for millions, if not billions of people?
Thank you so much, Dan, for inviting me to talk about this issue of clean cooking access in today's podcast. So when we talk about clean cooking in Africa, we're really talking about one of the most under-addressed crises on the continent today. The IEA has been tracking clean cooking progress for about 25 years, and we see that from our data, as of today, nearly 1 billion people in Africa still don't have access to clean cooking solutions. And the issue is that this number isn't going down. In fact, it's still growing, and looking at just between 2022 and 2023 alone, 14 million people were added to the count of those without access. And this is largely due to the fact that population growth in Africa has outpaced the rate of progress. So the continent is gaining ground on providing access, but it's slow, and this is really too slow.
And maybe we could dig in a little bit more to the practicalities. What does that look like? So in an average home that doesn't have access to clean cooking, how are they going out collecting fuel? What are some of the pressures that puts on their time and their family's time as well?
Just this issue has a lot of weight and creates a lot of burden on the households in Africa that are most affected by the lack of access to clean cooking solutions. And what does this mean? It means that across the region, about 4 in every 5 households are still cooking over open fires or just on very simple stoves made from 3 stones or in better situations, traditional improved biomass cook stoves. They use very polluting fuels like wood, waste, charcoal, and kerosene. And these are mainly households in rural areas. And another thing that I would like to highlight is just the existence of huge disparities between the urban and rural areas. So we see from our analysis that urban areas could reach nearly universal access by 2035, while in rural areas this can be achievable an average in 2040 if all conditions and our scenarios are met.
Now, when people talk about access to clean cooking being a gendered issue, maybe you could explain a bit more about what people mean.
Sure. And it's true. It's really like a gender issue because, of course, we know that most of the time it's women and girls who are the ones that often take care of collecting fuels and cooking in the households. And for cooking, let's be honest, it's not only in Africa, it's also in other regions in the world. Women are the ones to spend time cooking for their families. So therefore, it's obvious that these are the ones who are being most affected by the issue of lack of access to clean cooking. So they are the ones collecting fuels, cooking over toxic smoke, and they are the ones paying the cost, the expenses of their own health. They don't have enough time to go for school and to have other activities that provide income to themselves. And just to give you an idea about the numbers, the daily task of gathering fuel and cooking over traditional stoves and fires requires an average 4 hours a day. And in rural areas, this can go up to 5 hours. This is just an average because the situation can be much worse in some places. Myself, I've spoken to some NGOs active in rural communities in Africa. And they said that sometimes young and old ladies can walk up to 3 hours each way into forested mountain slopes to gather firewood. They spend in total about 7 hours to collect enough firewood for cooking. And then they need to carry these heavy loads on their shoulders, which of course exposes them to injuries and to danger. Unfortunately, it's also these communities, of course, they can't afford to cook in batch, also because they don't have conservation means, refrigerators, etc. So they need to cook fresh meals every single time.
Okay, so it does have a uniquely sharp impact on female education levels, but maybe you could talk to us about the environment as well, because it has a huge impact on deforestation.
The lack of clean cooking is linked to the loss of 1.3 billion hectares of forest each year. This is of the magnitude of forest areas having the size of entire countries.
Now, which other parts of the world have had successes in the past? When you look away from Africa to other parts of the world, where has had success in expanding access to clean cooking?
Two regions really stand out, which are Asia and Latin America. So, according to our data, since 2010, these regions have helped over 1 billion gain access to clean cooking. That's a massive shift, and it has been led by countries like India, Indonesia, and China. Looking into Indonesia, for instance, so back in the 2000s, only about 7% of households had access to clean cooking, and today that number is over 90%. The big driver behind this transformation was the kerosene to LPG conversion program, which was launched in 2007. And what they did was pretty smart because they used the country's existing kerosene distribution system and built on it to expand access to LPG. They also introduced free starter kits, a stove, cylinder, hose, and regulator to tens of millions of households and small businesses.
And for listeners who don't know, LPG stands for liquefied petroleum gas, which is a fuel that generally comes from oil refining or the production of natural gas. And now perhaps you could tell me about where the solutions, the leadership is coming from, whether that's from inside Africa or elsewhere.
Yes, we do say that there is an important need for international collaboration, that all stakeholders, partners work together. But there's actually a lot of homegrown leadership across the continent, from governments, from the private sector, and from local innovators who understand better than anyone else the challenges and opportunities on the ground. So starting with governments, and one big example right now is South Africa. South Africa holds the G20 presidency this year, and this is the first time that an African country has taken on that role. It's using this G20 presidency as a platform to put clean cooking and energy access right at the top of the global agenda. This is a huge opportunity, not just to keep the spotlight on the issue, but to mobilize this international funding, to build coalitions, and to make sure that commitments translate into real action on the ground.
And just lastly, if the goals about expanding clean cooking can be reached by 2040, give us a sense of what that would mean for Africa in terms of innovation, in terms of the broader industrial goals. What could this mean across the entire continent?
It's a huge opportunity. We talked about time saving. Switching to clean cooking allows to save up to 2 hours every single day across the continent. So this is just the equivalent of all the working hours in Brazil in 1 year. And that's the time that can be used for earning money, going to school, and starting small businesses. It has huge consequences and benefits for women's empowerment and human capital development. We talked about job creation. The IEA estimates that by 2040, the clean cooking sector could create over 460,000 permanent jobs across sub-Saharan Africa. Just to give you an idea of scale, that's about the same number of people currently employed by all electric utilities in the region. And again, this is not just about jobs in big cities, it's about local job creation at scale. So work can be created in manufacturing stoves and cylinders, distribution of fuels, maintenance, and even after sales services. And what's exciting in this is that it also creates space for entrepreneurships, especially for women-led businesses. So, in short, access to clean cooking just triggers a really important virtuous circle. We have healthier people, mainly amongst youth and women, more productive workers, stronger gender equity, and importantly, we have also less burden on public spending on health, environment, which can be used also for more productive activities.
Okay, well, Syrine El Abed, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Okay, Dan Wetzel, thank you so much for joining us. Now, why has the IEA been interested in clean cooking? Why has momentum been building over this particular issue?
This is actually an issue the IEA has been following for more than 2 decades. We were the first intergovernmental organization to track access to electricity and clean cooking. And this has been a sort of a lifetime passion project of our executive director, Dr. Burrell. This is one of the, in his mind, one of the most fundamental forms of energy insecurity, and something that the IEA has long paid attention to, understanding how to give 2 billion people on the planet access to ways to cook their food in a way that doesn't have detriments to their health, helps them save time, and allows them to pursue other things.
And what would you say to people who would argue that actually this feels like more of an environmental or a health issue than an energy issue?
So I think all the reasons why we do clean cooking at the end of the day are because of the health, because of the environment, because of the time savings, helping women be able to pursue education, jobs. So these are the reasons we do it. But in order to do it, we need the energy sector. And when we've seen great examples across the world from India, Indonesia, Brazil, many of these countries who have made a lot of progress on extending access to clean cooking, they've done so through their energy sectors. So relying on their state-owned enterprises, their utilities, the private sector to really come to bear to distribute the fuels needed and make sure that we're reaching the people with low-cost energy, reliable energy, and sustainable energy in many cases.
Now, we've covered other topics on this podcast like geothermal or nuclear that are extremely technical, need big upfront sums. That isn't the case with this. So maybe you could just tell us, what do we need to roll out access to clean cooking? What are some of the technologies? What are some of the equipment that we need to make a difference on the ground?
As you said, this is not rocket science. We have the technologies. Most people in the world today, 2/3 of us, have access to these technologies in our homes. We use them every day. So really, this is a challenge of distribution. How do we get these out to a wide swath of people, and many people who can't really afford some of the energy and the upfront cost of this on a daily basis? So that is the challenge of this, but we've proven different ways across the world on how to do that. So some of the solutions that we see as being the most impactful in the context, particularly in Africa, is LPG. Electricity. We're also seeing biomass cook stoves, so ones that still burn with wood but reduce the amount of harmful pollution that is coming off and smoke coming off that wood or other fuels burned. But we're also seeing emerging solutions like bioethanol, which is really coming to bear in a big way in some parts of Africa. Biogas, which is used in many rural areas and can also have the added benefit of producing manure that can help with agriculture as well. So there's a lot of different techniques and solutions that are coming to bear, and all of them play a role, we think, in Africa. But if we look at the past, LPG, which is a mixture of butane and propane, this fuel has been the workhorse in many other parts of the world. So over 90% of the people who gained access in the last 5 years to clean cooking solutions in Africa did so through LPG. And if we look elsewhere in the world, around 80% of all new access extended in these major leaders like Indonesia, India, 80% of them did so through LPG. So part of the flexibility of this fuel is that it's easily transportable and can be used in cylinders, so you can reach things deeper into rural areas that may not have the infrastructure, and the overhead of that infrastructure is quite light.
And you spoke about the infrastructure. What do we mean there? How big are some of the containers that you need to store some of the fuels that you mentioned? What does that look like on the ground?
It's helpful to put it into perspective when thinking about something like LNG, which we're hearing a lot about these days, these large LNG terminals, liquefied natural gas. These large terminals that are coming to play, these are multi-billion-dollar projects. Right at the low end, we're talking $6 billion, high end, even some multi-train things coming online near $25 billion. So we're talking massive infrastructure. When we're thinking about the port infrastructure to receive LPG on the ships and the sort of cargo containing the storage units. These are under much lower pressure. These are much smaller in size, and they are costing sort of all in under 100 million. Sometimes many of the smaller ones less than 50 million. So the scale of these is very, very different.
Now I want to talk a bit about financing because, again, we mentioned other technologies can be very expensive, need huge upfront costs. So talk to us about some of the sums that are needed to provide some of these solutions in Africa, and also give us a sense of what percentage of the global energy mix is needed to achieve some of the goals that have been set.
Absolutely. So this is a very small portion of the overall energy investment needs we see globally today. So when we did our new analysis, we looked at, based on historic best rates of progress, how fast could the world move on extending clean cooking access if each country sort of accelerated to the fastest historic rates seen in comparable parts of the world. What we saw is that around 2040, we'd be able to reach universal access to clean cooking. And the sums of money over that time frame are roughly $4 billion annually on the global scale to extend clean cooking access. So to put this into scale, this is less than 0.1% of total energy investment.
Okay, you mentioned $4 billion a year, and that's a global figure. Maybe you could just drill down a little bit into what is needed in Africa and how much of that money has currently been provided, how much of a gap still exists.
Yeah, great question. So in Africa, it's around $2 billion, so half of that overall sum. And in terms of how much is being mobilized today, based on new tracking from the IEA, we estimate around 700 million is being mobilized each year towards clean cooking. So that's good. Obviously not at that 2 billion, so we need to accelerate to that. There's a lot of effort going on right now, a lot of new policies, a lot of new initiatives to finance this. And many of these, some of this momentum started at a summit that we, the IEA, held with the government of Tanzania, the government of Norway, and the African Development Bank in 2024. This summit, during it, we had around 2.2 billion of new financial commitments dedicated to clean cooking in Africa, which we were very, very pleased by. So this is basically roughly 1 year of what we would need for the next 15 years to extend this.
And could you tell us, where is that money coming from? Is it coming from governments, the private sector? Does it include carbon credits? Maybe you could just talk us through the mix.
It's a mix, as you said. The private sector is playing the major role. Around 80% of the commitments are from the private sector and 20% are from governments. And it's going to take both portions because the private sector often is going to places where, the economics make sense today. Governments play a role in that concessional finance that will be very key to draw businesses to the sort of frontiers that may be a little less obviously economically interesting today. How do we draw them to and laying some of the core foundations and building the ecosystem that makes it easier for the private sector to move faster? So in terms of that, part of the private sector commitments as well was for the purchase of carbon credits. Around 15% of that overall total for 2.2 billion was for carbon credit commitments. And already today, many of these technologies, carbon credits represent a major form of revenue for those businesses today, particularly things like biomass cook stoves, bioethanol. These are some of the two that have really found the right business model to mobilize these. And so that was a large portion of this.
I wonder if you could just put in perspective the impact that not having access to clean cooking has on the environment. What issues are we talking about when it comes to global warming? And also, I wonder if there's a problem that you are potentially locking in people in Africa to a fossil fuel system rather than a clean energy system.
Great question. So when we look at it today, there's two sources of emissions that come from clean cooking, or sort of a lack of clean cooking, The first is when you're burning wood, charcoal, animal dung in some cases. In these inefficient stoves, you're frequently getting incomplete combustion, and you're getting methane coming off of these. And so that's around half of the emissions associated with it, is this uncombusted methane. The other half is related to the deforestation, so cutting down and not replanting various trees to make the charcoal to bring this firewood into cities and other places. So obviously some of this is more sustainable. People are just picking up sticks and debris from the forest. But for these ones that are really trying to service these large cities that are really dependent on this, it's a major driver of deforestation in certain hotspots. So when we look at this together at the global scale, this is around 1.2 gigatons of emissions annually. This is roughly the emissions from international aviation and international shipping together. So when we think about how much effort is committed to those different sectors in terms of the environmental cause, this is an easy win by comparison of some of the more difficult decarbonization challenges in those sectors.
And then going back to the first part of that question about concerns about locking people into a fossil fuel system, what is the response to that argument?
Yeah, so now when we look at the different solutions we have there, all of the clean cooking solutions we have would help address these drivers of emissions. So even switching to LPG, which is the fossil fuel, this would be a net emissions reduction because you're eliminating that methane, you're limiting that deforestation. So any single one of these clean cooking options would be a net reducer, and this is part of the reason why all of them are qualified for carbon credits. So this shift in the near term is a crucial portion of near-term abatement, especially of some of these more potent greenhouse gases like methane. The lock-in, there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of research into thinking about what other drop-in fuels could be an option, and the change of how people cook will evolve over time.
Let's just step back for a second. On the one hand, the IEA sees a pathway to clean cooking across Africa, but realistically, what are the things that need to happen to get us there? How can funding be tracked? What needs to happen on the ground? Where does leadership need to come from? Perhaps you could give us an overview.
Yeah, so this is going to be an issue that will involve all sorts of actors, governments, private sector, multilateral development banks. There's all a role to play. South Africa, with their G20 presidency this year, is laying out sort of a new action plan that sort of goes through and says what are the specific policies that we're hoping African governments will put in place to move the needle on this? What are the specific financing targets, vehicles that the international development community needs to hit on this, and also what do they need the private sector to do in terms of standardization, the types of engagement that they need with governments, and what are the types of infrastructure that should be deployed to support clean cooking. So that plan, I think, is going to highlight some very concrete actions, things like that African governments can do, requiring all public buildings to shift over to clean cooking solutions, things like lowering taxes and tariffs on key pieces of equipment that are crucial to clean cooking, both stoves, but also the upstream supply chains for clean cooking, and then looking at other parts of the different actors. What are types of research? What are the types of data collection that needs to be put in place? What are the types of support that African governments are looking for from international development partners? Thinking about things like how do they provide funding and technical support that is placed within governments, secondments of experts on clean cooking into those places, best practice sharing with places like India, Indonesia. So it's really setting an agenda where South Africa is saying, here's what we know we need to be able to make progress on this at the African continent level. And African Union is really supportive of this initiative as well. So I think that's something to look for in terms of the concrete steps that will be taken for those who are looking to come in and make a difference in this space.
Well, Dan Wetzel, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.